My girlfriend's best friend convinced her I'm toxic, and she was shocked when I ended things over it. Here's how it went down. I'm a 28-year-old guy dating Sarah, who's 26, and we've been together for a little over a year. Overall, things have been really good. She's incredible, smart, funny, all the things. But there's one issue that's been a persistent headache: her best friend, Jake. Now, I'm not normally the jealous type, or at least I try not to be. I'm a believer in giving people space, trusting them, all that. But with Jake, it's been a real struggle. Jake is 27 and has been Sarah's closest friend since college. I knew they were tight from the start, and initially I didn't see it as a big deal. Everyone has a best friend, right? But after a while I began to notice certain things. They weren't just close, they were really close. I started feeling more like a third wheel in their relationship than a partner in mine with Sarah. Ever feel like the odd one out? That's me, constantly. Picture this: it's a regular Tuesday night, and Sarah and I have plans to hang out. I'm thinking we'll watch a movie, maybe order some food, just have a low-key evening. But then, out of nowhere, Jake calls. Suddenly, she's all excited to go out for dinner with him, and just like that, my plans are scrapped. No invitation, no "hey, want to come along?" Just poof, as if I'm invisible. And this isn't a one-off, it happens a lot. They have these routine hangouts, dinners, movie nights, late-night drives, all things you'd expect a couple to do together. Whenever I bring it up, she just says, "Oh, it's just Jake, you know how we are." And yeah, I do know, which is exactly the issue. There was one night I remember especially well. We were supposed to have a quiet night in, just us. But guess what? Jake called. He'd had a rough day, and Sarah felt she had to rush over to comfort him. I sat there thinking, what about us? But, as usual, Jake took precedence. And when I do get to join them, it's beyond awkward. They have their own world of inside jokes and shared stories, and I'm left trying to keep up. You know that feeling when people are laughing, but you have no idea what's funny. That's me, every time I'm with them. They're like their own duo, and I'm stuck on the outside. At first, I tried to brush it off. I kept telling myself, they've been friends for years. Don't blow it out of proportion. But then, I started noticing smaller things that didn't sit right. Like how Jake messages her constantly morning, noon, night, even when we're together. And it's not just casual. He uses pet names like babe and sweetheart. Who does that? One time we were on a date, and her phone kept lighting up with messages from him. When I asked, she laughed and said, "That's just how we talk, it's nothing." But it felt wrong. I mean, I'm her boyfriend, shouldn't those terms be reserved for me? Then there are the late-night FaceTime calls. I've woken up in the middle of the night to find her whispering and laughing with him. I brought it up the next morning, and she said Jake was going through something and needed to talk. Okay, I get that. But why does he always need her? Can't he reach out to any other friends or, I don't know, handle it like an adult? Some of you might think, dude, just relax, they're friends, trust me, I've tried. But when you feel like you're playing second fiddle constantly, it's tough. A relationship should be about two people, not three. What bothers me most is how much I've tried to be understanding. I've swallowed my pride, set aside my worries, and done my best to be the bigger person. But there's a limit to how much anyone can take before they start feeling like an extra in someone else's story. It's not like I'm demanding something crazy. I'm not saying she should drop Jake from her life. I get it, they have history. But would it hurt to set some boundaries? Maybe don't prioritize him over me every time. Maybe don't use pet names that blur the lines of friendship. Is that asking too much? Honestly, I'm reaching my breaking point. I love Sarah, but the whole Jake situation has me rethinking everything. It feels like I'm constantly tiptoeing, trying not to come off as the jealous boyfriend. But when do my feelings matter? When can I finally say this isn't working for me? Another time, we were out at a nice restaurant, having a good time. Then her phone buzzed and I saw her face light up. It was Jake, of course. She spent the next 10 minutes texting back and forth with him while I sat there picking at my food. I finally asked if she could put her phone away, and she looked at me like I'd asked her to do the impossible. "It's just Jake," she said. "It's not a big deal, not a big deal." It felt like I was on a date alone while she was on one with her phone. I felt like I was the backup guy, and that really started to mess with my head. Every time her phone buzzed, I'd get this sinking feeling, wondering if it was Jake again. Then, there was this weekend getaway we'd been planning for weeks. I was really looking forward to it, a chance to be together without interruptions. But of course, Jake struck again. He found out about a concert happening that same weekend and asked Sarah to go with him. And guess what? She asked if we could reschedule our trip so she could go with Jake. I was stunned. Here we were, planning this romantic weekend, and she wanted to postpone it for a concert with Jake. When I asked why she couldn't skip it, she got defensive. "It's a band we both love," she said. "I can't miss this with him." It felt like a slap in the face. Our relationship was supposed to matter, but I kept getting the short end of the stick when it came to Jake. It wasn't just the constant texts and calls. It was the way her face would light up whenever Jake was around, the inside jokes, the way she'd drop everything for him. I started to see how much she changed when he was in the picture. She'd be more cheerful and full of energy, like he brought out a side of her that I couldn't seem to reach. It made me feel like I was failing as a boyfriend, as though I wasn't enough for her. But what really got to me was how dismissive she was about my feelings. Every time I tried to explain how uncomfortable her relationship with Jake made me, she'd brush it off with, "You're being ridiculous. Jake's just my friend. You don't have to worry about him." But how could I not worry when he seemed to be a constant presence in our relationship? It wasn't just about the pet names, the endless texts, or the late-night calls. It was about the fact that I felt like I was competing for her attention. And no matter what I did, I always came in second. I started questioning myself, wondering if I was being unreasonable, insecure, or just plain jealous. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I wasn't asking her to cut Jake out of her life completely. I just wanted her to understand how painful it was to be pushed aside for him over and over. Yet, no matter how many times I tried to talk to her about it, she'd dismiss my concerns and tell me I was overthinking. It was as if my feelings didn't matter, like I was just expected to deal with it. That's when I began to see that maybe this wasn't just about Jake. Maybe it was about something deeper, about how Sarah didn't seem to care how her actions were affecting me. That realization hurt more than anything Jake could ever do. I'd been doing my best to hold things together with Sarah, despite everything with Jake, convincing myself to be patient, that eventually she'd see how much this was impacting me. But one weekend, my patience finally ran out, and things got ugly. Here's how it happened. Sarah and I had been planning an anniversary trip for months. We were both excited about it, or at least I thought so. We had it all planned: a cozy cabin, some hiking, just the two of us escaping from all the noise. It was supposed to be our time, a chance to break away from everything, including Jake. But a few days before we were set to leave, Sarah dropped a bomb. She said, "Hey, so Jake just found out about this concert that same weekend. It's a band we both love, and he really wants me to go with him." I sat there, stunned, waiting for her to say, but of course I told him no because we have our trip. But no, she said, "Do you think we could reschedule our trip so I can go?" Reschedule? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was our anniversary, something we'd been planning for months, and she wanted to push it aside for a last-minute concert with Jake. I tried to stay calm, but I felt anger bubbling up. I asked her, "Why can't Jake just go by himself, or take someone else? Why does it have to be you?" She looked at me as though I was being unreasonable and said, "You don't get it. This band means a lot to us. It's like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I can't miss it." And that was when it hit me where I truly stood in this relationship. No matter what, Jake was always going to come first. I told her straight up, "Sarah, this isn't okay. You're asking me to step aside for Jake again. I feel like I'm always competing with him for your time and attention, and I'm tired of it." But she brushed it off, saying I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal. "You knew Jake was part of my life when we started dating," she said. "Why are you trying to change me now?" That hit me hard. I wasn't trying to change her. I just wanted to feel like I was a priority too, like our relationship mattered. But in that moment, it felt like even asking for that was too much. Then she said something that really stung. "Jake thinks you're being controlling and insecure," she told me. Great, now Jake had an opinion on our relationship. Why did his thoughts on us even matter here? This was supposed to be about Sarah and me, not him. I told her I needed some boundaries: no more pet names with Jake, no more constant one-on-one hangouts, and definitely no more prioritizing him over us. But she blew up at me, calling me controlling and toxic. It was as if she couldn't even hear me. All I wanted was basic respect, but to her, I was the problem. We argued for what felt like hours. I kept trying to explain how I felt, how painful it was to be treated like the second choice, but she kept insisting that I was the one with the issue. She even said, "If you can't handle Jake being in my life, maybe this isn't going to work." At that moment, I knew we'd hit a breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I couldn't keep ignoring how much this hurt. I loved Sarah, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness just to keep the peace. It wasn't fair to me. After that argument, she started giving me the silent treatment. I was left alone with my thoughts, replaying everything over and over, questioning if I was really in the wrong, if I was being too sensitive or controlling. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I wasn't asking for the impossible, I just wanted to feel like I mattered. I thought about all the times I had put her first, all the sacrifices I'd made for our relationship. And what did I get in return? More time for Jake, less time for me. It felt like I was fighting a losing battle, one I was never going to win. That weekend was supposed to be a celebration of us, a time to reconnect and strengthen our relationship. But instead, it turned into another reminder of where I stood in her life. I realized I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, or I was going to lose myself completely. And that's when I made a choice. I gave her an ultimatum. I didn't want to, but I felt I had no other option. She could set some boundaries with Jake, or we were done. I wasn't sure how she'd react, but I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to see if she was willing to fight for us, or if I was just wasting my time. At that moment, I felt an odd mix of sadness, frustration, anger, and relief. I'd finally put everything out there, laid all my feelings on the line, and now it was up to her to decide. To be honest, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what she'd say. After the argument over the concert, I realized something had to change. I was done being the guy constantly sidelined whenever Jake needed Sarah's attention. Sure, I loved her, but I couldn't keep feeling like I was an afterthought in my own relationship. It was wearing me down, and I'd reached my limit. That's when I knew I needed to set a boundary. This wasn't about me thinking, I'll give her an ultimatum, and everything will be fixed truthfully. I hated the thought of giving one. Ultimatums felt like a desperate last option to me, but at that point, I was desperate. She needed to understand how much this situation was affecting me. So one evening I asked her to sit down with me, no distractions, no texts from Jake interrupting us, just us. I tried to stay calm, though I was incredibly nervous. I had no idea how she'd respond, but I was determined not to back down this time. I told her straight up, "Sarah, we need to talk about Jake," she sighed, clearly annoyed. "We've already talked about this," she said, brushing me off like it was nothing. But to me, it was everything. "I know we've talked," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, "but nothing has changed, and I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm always competing for your attention, and Jake keeps winning." She rolled her eyes, which didn't help. "You're being ridiculous," she said. "Jake's my best friend. He's always been there for me. You knew that from the start." I did, I admitted, but I didn't know it would feel like this. Like I'm just a placeholder in your life while Jake gets the important moments. That finally seemed to get her attention. She frowned, but she stayed quiet this time, so I kept going. "I'm not saying you should stop being friends with him. I understand that you two are close, but there needs to be some boundaries. I'm your boyfriend, Sarah. I should be the one you turn to first, not him." Crossing her arms, she defensively asked, "What kind of boundaries?" "No more pet names," I said, listing my points. "No more constant one-on-one hangouts, and definitely no more putting him ahead of me. When we're together, I need to feel like I matter, like I'm not just a guy you spend time with when Jake's busy." She didn't look happy, but her face was hard to read. Then she asked, sharply, "So, what if I don't agree to this? Are we over?" I hesitated for a second, feeling a lump in my throat, but answered yes. "If you can't do this, then maybe we shouldn't be together." There was silence as she stared at me, and for a moment I thought she might actually take me seriously. But then she shook her head and laughed bitterly. "You're giving me an ultimatum. That's not fair." "I know it's not ideal," I admitted, "but I don't know what else to do. I've tried talking about this, but nothing's changed. I'm not trying to control you, Sarah. I just want to feel like I'm your partner, not some extra in your life. She said nothing for a while, and the quiet was brutal. I could feel the weight of everything hanging in the air, and it was suffocating. Eventually, she spoke. "You're asking me to change who I am," she said quietly. No, I shook my head. "I'm asking you to understand how this is affecting me. I'm asking you to meet me halfway." She looked down at her hands, and for a moment I thought she might actually consider it. But then she sighed and said, "Jake thinks you're being controlling." That stung like a slap. Jake thinks? Why did his opinion matter so much? This wasn't about him, it was about us. She didn't respond to that, and the silence stretched on. I could feel the frustration rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. Blowing up wouldn't help. "I don't want to be the bad guy here," I said softly. "I just want to be with you without feeling like I'm competing for your attention." Sarah looked up, and for the first time I saw something shift in her eyes: guilt, realization. I wasn't sure. But she didn't say anything more, only nodded slowly, as if processing everything. "I need to think about this," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take all the time you need," I replied, standing up, "but know that I'm serious, Sarah. I can't keep going like this." With that, I walked out, leaving her sitting there in silence. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew I had done everything I could. Now, it was up to her, and whatever she chose, I had to be ready for it. After giving Sarah that ultimatum, I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me thought she'd just walk away, maybe even run straight to Jake. I'd braced myself for the worst, but what actually happened caught me off guard. It was Saturday night, a couple of days after our big argument, and I was at home, mentally preparing myself for whatever was coming. I wasn't expecting her to show up at my door, but there she was, looking nervous and clutching her phone tightly, like it was her lifeline. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I stepped aside to let her in, my heart pounding. I didn't know if this was going to turn into another fight, but I knew we couldn't leave things unresolved. She sat down on the couch, fidgeting with her hands. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she started, still not quite meeting my eyes, "about Jake, about us." I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. I didn't want to push her, but I wasn't going to let her avoid the issue. She needed to address it head on. "I canceled the concert," she said finally, looking up at me. "I told Jake I couldn't go." I was surprised. I hadn't expected her to cancel. Why, I asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. Taking a deep breath, she answered, "Because I realized you were right. I've been putting Jake before you, and that's not fair. I didn't see it before, but now I get it." She looked like admitting this was hard, but she continued. "I've been selfish," she admitted. "I was so caught up in my friendship with Jake that I didn't stop to think about how it was affecting you. I'm sorry." Hearing her say that was like a weight lifting off my chest, but at the same time I couldn't help but wonder if it was too little, too late. "Why now?" I asked. "Why did it take an ultimatum for you to realize this?" She hesitated, then admitted, "Because I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, but I didn't want to lose Jake either. I thought I could keep both without any problems, but I was wrong." Her honesty hit me hard. She was being sincere, and I could see it wasn't easy for her. But I wasn't about to just brush everything aside because of a heartfelt apology. "I appreciate the apology," I said slowly, "but this isn't just about the concert. It's about everything: the texts, the pet names, the late-night calls. This has been building up for a long time." Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I don't want to keep hurting you. I want to fix this. I want to be better." Her sincerity was clear. But I knew trust takes more than just words to rebuild. "I need to see real changes," I told her. "I need to feel like I'm a priority in your life." She wiped her tears, nodding. "I understand, and I'm ready to show you. Let's spend this weekend together, just us, no distractions, no Jake. I want to make things right." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt guarded, afraid to get my hopes up, but another part wanted to believe we could maybe turn things around. "All right," I said finally. She gave me a tentative smile, uncertain if I meant it. But I did. I wanted to give her a chance, even if I wasn't sure if it would be enough. We spent the evening just talking, no plans, no interruptions, just the two of us reconnecting. It was awkward at first, but as the night went on, it started feeling right, like maybe we were rediscovering each other. She opened up about her friendship with Jake, sharing things I hadn't known before, how he'd supported her through hard times and how their bond had developed over shared struggles. I understood why she valued him, even if it didn't excuse everything. I also shared my side, explaining how it felt to be sidelined, to feel like I was always second to someone else. I told her how painful it was to feel like an afterthought in her life. By the time we went to bed, I felt drained but also lighter. Things weren't instantly fixed, but it was a beginning. We were finally talking about what we should have addressed long ago. The next morning, she made breakfast, and we spent the day together. No Jake, no interruptions, just us. It felt good, but I knew it would take more than a nice weekend to mend everything that had broken. Still, for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful, like maybe, if we both tried, we could work through this. But I knew I had to stay cautious. I couldn't let myself get swept up and ignore all the hurt that had brought us here. As the day passed, I started wondering about our future. Could we really move past all this? Could she set the boundaries I needed, or was this a short-term fix for a deeper issue? I didn't have the answers, but I was willing to take it one step at a time. There was still a long road ahead, but at least now we were finally on the same page. For me, that was a positive step forward. Following our heartfelt conversation, we decided to spend the weekend just focusing on each other, attempting to rebuild what had been falling apart. I was still unsure if anything could really mend the damage, but I was ready to try. Friday night started simply dinner, a movie, and trying to be present with each other. We were cooking pasta together in my kitchen, something easy. It almost felt like the old days when everything was light and easy. We laughed and talked casually about random things, and for a moment, it felt like we were on the right track. But halfway through the meal, Sarah put her fork down and looked at me in a way that told me something big was coming. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quieter than usual. My heart skipped a beat. I braced myself, thinking it might be more about Jake or something entirely unexpected. The room felt heavy as I waited for her to continue. "I'm pregnant," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I froze, my mind racing to process the news. "Pregnant," she nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I found out a few days ago. I didn't know how to tell you. I've been scared at first. I was in shock we hadn't talked about kids, at least not seriously." But as the words sank in, I felt a wave of emotion, surprise, a touch of happiness, and a bit of anxiety. I stood up, walked over, and hugged her. Wow, I managed to say, still wrapping my mind around it. "That's incredible." "Why?" "That's incredible." She held on to me tightly, and for a moment, everything felt right. This was huge, life-changing even, but it also felt like it might bring us closer together. We spent the rest of the night talking about what it meant for us, sitting on the couch, hands intertwined, discussing baby names and how we'd handle practical matters, money, space, telling our families. Sarah seemed genuinely happy, and I started to believe that maybe this was exactly what we needed to move forward. But as the initial excitement settled, a nagging thought crept in, something I couldn't shake. The next morning, we went out for a walk on one of those cool, crisp mornings that make everything feel a bit more alive. We talked more about the baby, about what our future might look like, but that nagging feeling lingered in the back of my mind. After we returned to my place, I noticed something odd. Sarah's phone, which usually buzzed with texts from Jake throughout the day, was silent. No calls, no messages. I didn't mention it at first, but it struck me as unusual. Jake had always been a constant presence, always reaching out or needing something, and now nothing. As the day continued, I couldn't help but notice how much more relaxed Sarah seemed. No distractions, no nervous glances at her phone. It was almost too quiet. I tried to push it out of my mind, to focus on us and the baby, but my doubts wouldn't go away. That evening, as we sat together on the couch, I finally asked her, "Hey, I've noticed Jake hasn't been around much lately. Is everything okay with him?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before responding. Understood. I'll paraphrase the text as directed, ensuring to preserve every detail and match the original length closely. Yeah, he's just giving us some space, she said, her tone sounding a little too casual. He knows we're working through things, so he's stepping back for now. It sounded believable, but something about it didn't sit right. Jake wasn't the type to simply step away, not after how deeply he'd been intertwined in our lives. And then, a troubling thought hit me hard. What if Jake knew something I didn't? What if that's why he had gone silent? I didn't confront her right away, but the suspicion started to grow. I replayed everything in my mind: the sudden apology, the pregnancy announcement, Jake's sudden absence. Could there be more to this story? Was Jake more than just a friend? And had he pulled back after learning about the baby because he thought it might be his? On Sunday morning, I woke up early, the doubts still swirling. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Sarah was still asleep beside me, looking peaceful, totally unaware of the thoughts racing through my mind. As I got up and made coffee, I kept piecing together the timeline in my head. If she had just discovered the pregnancy, that would mean the baby was conceived at least a few months ago, around the same time things between us were tense, and she was spending a lot of time with Jake. The pieces seemed to fit, and it wasn't looking good. I couldn't bring myself to confront her directly, not yet, but the questions were eating away at me. Was this baby actually mine, or could Jake be the father? Was that why he'd disappeared? Throughout the day, I tried to act normal, but inside my mind was racing. I observed Sarah, looking for any clues that she might be hiding something, but she appeared genuinely happy, excited about the baby, and totally focused on us. It left me feeling confused. By Sunday night, I was emotionally spent. I knew I needed answers, but I didn't want to trigger another argument. I didn't want to ruin what had been a good weekend, but I also couldn't keep these doubts bottled up. As Sarah was getting ready to leave, she noticed my silence. "Are you okay?" she asked, a note of concern in her voice. Yeah, I lied. Just tired, I guess. She gave me a long hug before heading out, and as I watched her leave, I felt a mix of emotions: love, fear, doubt. I wanted to believe that everything was going to be all right, that we could be happy together, but the unresolved questions about Jake and the baby wouldn't let me rest. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, knowing that sooner or later I would have to confront this head-on. This wasn't just about the baby or Jake anymore. It was about trust, and I wasn't sure where we stood. After Sarah left that Sunday night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. All weekend, I'd been trying to convince myself that we were making progress, that things were finally getting better. But the doubts were still there, gnawing at me, especially about the baby. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying how silent things had become with Jake. The guy who couldn't go a day without calling or texting her was suddenly out of the picture. It didn't add up. Something about it felt wrong, like there was more to this than Sarah was letting on. Later that night, as I sat on the couch, her phone buzzed. She had forgotten it on the coffee table. Normally, I would have ignored it, but my curiosity took over. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I couldn't resist. I opened her messages and scrolled to her conversations with Jake. What I found stopped me cold. Jake had blocked her. There was no profile picture, no recent messages, just a notification saying he had blocked her. Why would Jake cut off Sarah, especially now? Confused and feeling sick to my stomach, I scrolled further back in their chat history. That's when I found the conversation that changed everything. The messages were from a couple of weeks ago, just before Sarah told me she was pregnant. Sarah: Jake, I'm pregnant. Jake: are you sure? Sarah: yes. I took a test. Jake: it could be his, right? Sarah: I don't know. I'm scared. Jake: if it's mine, I can't do this. I'm not ready to be a dad. You should consider an abortion. The messages continued, making it clear where Jake stood. He wanted no part of it, and after that last message, he blocked her. Just like that. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. She had told Jake before telling me, and the fact that she wasn't even sure who the father was hit me like a ton of bricks. All the unease, the doubts I'd tried to push aside, came rushing back. She had been cheating on me. There was no other way to interpret it. Everything now made sense: the sudden apology, her emotional breakdown, Jake's disappearance. She had hoped I'd never find out, that it would all just fade away. I waited until the next morning to confront her. She arrived, smiling like everything was fine, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. "We need to talk," I said, my tone cold. She looked at me, puzzled. "What's wrong?" I held up her phone. "I went through your messages with Jake." Her face went pale. "You, what?" "I know, Sarah," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I know you told him about the baby before you told me. I know he told you to get an abortion because he didn't want to be a dad. And I know you didn't tell me the truth." She started crying. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered. "I was scared." I felt my hands clench, not out of anger, but out of sheer frustration. "You didn't know how to tell me? You didn't know who the father was, Sarah. You were with both of us, and you didn't think I deserved the truth." She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said softly. "It just got out of control." I shook my head, and keeping me in the dark was the best solution. She wiped her tears, trying to compose herself. "I was going to tell you eventually. I just needed time." "Well, guess what?" I said, my voice hardening. "Time's up. We're figuring this out right now. I want a paternity test." She nodded, still crying. "Okay." We got the test done a few days later, and the results came back quickly. I wasn't the father. I'd sensed it, but seeing it confirmed in black and white felt like a knife to the heart. When I showed her the results, she broke down again. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know what to do." I couldn't even look at her. "What about Jake?" I asked. "Have you told him?" She shook her head. "He refused to take a test. He doesn't want anything to do with it." That was the breaking point for me. "I'm done, Sarah," I said firmly. "I can't do this anymore. You lied, cheated, and now you expect me to stay and help clean up the mess. I'm sorry, but I can't." She tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she begged, "we can fix this." "No, Sarah," I replied, my voice cold. "There's no fixing this. I can't trust you anymore. I can't be with someone who lies to me like this. Don't contact me again." And with that, I walked away, leaving her there, sobbing. It hurt like hell, but I knew it was the right decision. I couldn't keep living in a lie, and I couldn't be with someone who didn't respect me enough to be honest.